The rain hammered against the windows as Derek stood in the doorway of what had been his home for 7 years. His wedding ring sat on the kitchen counter, the only thing he'd leave behind besides his pride. "You're pathetic," Victoria spat, her arms crossed as she leaned against the granite countertop he'd saved for months to afford. "Did you really think I'd stay married to someone like you? A middle management nobody who comes home smelling like office coffee and broken dreams." Derek said nothing. He'd learned that silence was sometimes the most powerful response. His wife, ex-wife, he corrected himself, had been carrying on with Brandon Castellane, the silver-tongued sales director at her firm. Derek had known for 3 months, watching the late nights turn into overnight conferences, the new lingerie that never made an appearance in their bedroom, the way she'd stopped bothering to hide the glow in her cheeks when she returned from her business dinners. "Brandon is everything you're not," she continued, her voice dripping with contempt. "Ambitious. Successful. Important. He's up for regional VP, you know. He actually has a future." Derek picked up his single duffel bag. Inside were clothes, his laptop, a photo of his parents, and his grandfather's watch. Everything else, the furniture, the art, the life they'd built, he left for her. Material possessions could be replaced. Time couldn't. Nothing to say. Victoria laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the empty house. "That's always been your problem, Derek. No fight in you. No passion. You just accept everything like a beaten dog. It's no wonder I had to look elsewhere for excitement." "The papers will be ready by Friday," Derek said quietly, adjusting his grip on the bag. "Your lawyer can send them to my office." "Oh, don't worry about the house," she said, examining her manicured nails. "Brandon and I will be very happy here. You were always just keeping it warm for someone better." Derek walked to the door, then paused. For a moment, Victoria thought he might finally show emotion, might beg or plead or rage. Instead, he simply said, "Goodbye, Victoria," and stepped out into the storm. As he drove away in his aging sedan, Derek didn't look back. In the rearview mirror, he could see Victoria standing in the doorway, already on her phone, probably calling Brandon to celebrate. Let her have her moment. Let her have her victory. Derek had learned something in his middle management career that Victoria had never understood. The long game always trumped the short win. The motel room was cheap and smelled of industrial cleaner, but it was clean and quiet. Derek sat on the edge of the bed and opened his laptop. The email he'd been waiting for sat at the top of his inbox, marked urgent. The subject line read, "Board decision, confidential." He opened it and read the words he'd been expecting. "Congratulations on your appointment as Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Holdings. Your first assignment will be the acquisition and restructuring of underperforming subsidiaries in the Northeast region." Derek had been recruited away from his middle management position 3 months ago, right around the time he discovered Victoria's affair. The headhunter had found him through a former colleague who'd recognized Derek's talent for turning around failing departments, for seeing the inefficiencies that others missed, for building systems that worked when everyone else had given up. He'd kept the interviews secret, kept the negotiations quiet, kept everything close to his chest while he watched his marriage crumble. Victoria had been so focused on her own deception that she'd never noticed his distraction, never questioned why he'd become so passive about her late nights and transparent excuses. The position came with a substantial salary increase, stock options, and most importantly, discretion. Meridian Holdings operated through numerous subsidiaries and shell companies. Very few people knew the full extent of what they owned or controlled. Derek closed his laptop and lay back on the uncomfortable mattress. Revenge, he'd learned, was a dish best served cold. And he was patient enough to let it freeze. 3 years passed like pages turning in a book Derek had written himself. The motel room gave way to a modest apartment, then to a sleek downtown penthouse he rarely used because he was always working. Meridian Holdings had given him autonomy and resources, and Derek had wielded both like surgical instruments. His first year as COO had been a masterclass in corporate restructuring. Derek identified bloated companies, cut waste, rebuilt teams, and turned quarterly losses into annual gains. His success rate was unprecedented: 17 acquisitions, 17 turnarounds. The board had noticed. The industry had noticed. "You have a gift," Nathaniel Cordova, the CEO of Meridian, told him over dinner at an exclusive restaurant where Derek now belonged. You see what others miss. You understand that companies aren't just balance sheets, they're ecosystems. You know which parts to feed and which to let die. Derek had smiled politely and said nothing about where he'd learned that lesson. Some teachers wore business suits. Others wore wedding rings they didn't honor. By year 2, Derek had been promoted to Chief Restructuring Officer with a portfolio that made his previous salary look like pocket change. He oversaw 83 companies across 12 states, all owned wholly or partially by Meridian. Most operated under their original names. Meridian preferred the shadows, preferred to let acquired companies maintain their identities while quietly controlling their destinies from behind corporate veils. Derek had become very good at working from the shadows too. He'd transformed himself physically as well. The stress-eating and resignation that had marked his marriage were gone, replaced by early morning workouts, tailored suits, and the confidence that came from proving his worth every single day. The man who'd left that house in the rain no longer existed. In his place was someone sharper, harder, more focused. Your 3 o'clock is here, his executive assistant, Patricia, announced through the intercom. She was efficient, professional, and asked no personal questions, exactly what Derek needed. The meeting was with acquisition targets, smaller firms that Meridian was considering for purchase. Derek listened as they pitched their value propositions, their growth potential, their desperation hidden behind PowerPoint slides and revenue projections. He could always see the desperation. He'd worn it himself once. We'll be in touch, he told them after an hour, and they left hopeful, not realizing he'd already identified 3 fatal flaws in their business model. Meridian would make an offer, a low one. They'd accept because they had no choice. Derek would restructure, and in 2 years, the company would be profitable. That's what he did. That's who he'd become. His phone buzzed with a text from Nathaniel. Coffee tomorrow? Big opportunity. Derek confirmed and returned to his reports. Big opportunity in Nathaniel's vocabulary meant significant acquisition. Something that would require Derek's full attention and strategic vision. He was ready. He was always ready now. That evening, in his penthouse, Derek stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Somewhere down there, Victoria was living her life with Brandon, probably married by now, probably thinking she'd won their divorce. She'd kept the house, kept the furniture, kept her dignity intact while Derek had slunk away in the rain with a single bag. She had no idea that the man she'd dismissed as replaceable now held the financial futures of thousands of employees in his hands. She had no idea that his name appeared in trade journals and industry publications, always accompanied by words like visionary and transformative. She had no idea because Derek had made sure of it. He avoided personal press, kept his private life private, and worked through corporate structures that kept his name out of the spotlight. Patience. Strategy. Silence. These were his weapons now, and he'd become a master of wielding them. Derek didn't know if he'd ever cross paths with Victoria again. Part of him hoped he wouldn't, that his success would be satisfaction enough, that building something real would heal the wounds she'd left. But another part of him, the part that still remembered standing in that doorway while she mocked everything he'd been, that part whispered that the universe had a way of bringing things full circle. Derek finished his whiskey and returned to his work. Whether Victoria ever learned what had become of him didn't matter. He'd already won. He'd become the man she'd sworn he could never be, and he'd done it without her, despite her, because of her. The best revenge, he was learning, wasn't confrontation. It was transformation. Victoria Castellane, she'd taken Brandon's name within 6 months of Derek's departure, stared at the rejection letter on her desk and felt her carefully constructed world begin to crack. The third bank in as many weeks had declined her loan application. The reasons were always vague: insufficient collateral, current market conditions, portfolio rebalancing. But Victoria knew the truth. Castellane and Associates, the boutique marketing firm she'd poured her savings and dreams into, was hemorrhaging money. Brandon's promised VP position had evaporated in a corporate restructuring, and his subsequent ventures had all failed spectacularly. Their marriage had followed suit, 2 years of increasingly bitter arguments culminating in a divorce that left Victoria with debt, the house she couldn't afford to maintain, and a business that was her last chance at financial survival. There's one more option, her lawyer, Gerald, had told her reluctantly. Heritage Capital Group. They specialize in high-risk commercial lending, but they're part of a larger parent company. I've submitted a preliminary application. Now, sitting in the reception area of Heritage Capital's downtown offices, Victoria straightened her suit jacket and tried to project confidence she didn't feel. The building was impressive, glass and steel, with art installations that probably cost more than her annual revenue. It spoke of money, power, and access to both. Ms. Castellane? Mr. Thornton will see you now. The receptionist's smile was professional, revealing nothing. Victoria followed her down a corridor lined with photographs of successful businesses Heritage had funded. Her heart quickened with hope. This could work. This could save everything. Garrett Thornton's office was expansive, with a view that stretched across the city. He was younger than Victoria expected, perhaps 40, with the easy confidence of someone who'd never known real failure. Please, sit, he gestured to a leather chair across from his desk. I've reviewed your application. Castellane and Associates. Marketing and Brand Consulting. Yes, Victoria launched into her prepared pitch. We've had an exceptional year in terms of client acquisition. The revenue dip is temporary, a few large projects that extended past their billing cycles. We have solid contracts lined up for Q3 and Q4, including. Ms. Castellane, Thornton interrupted gently, I'm not concerned about your Q3 projections. Heritage operates differently than traditional banks. We look at the total picture, the entrepreneur, the vision, the capacity for growth. He paused, studying her. However, for a loan of this size, we do require certain assurances. Victoria's hope flared. I have collateral. The house, my client list, intellectual property. We'll need a personal guarantee, Thornton continued, opening a folder. And given your debt-to-income ratio and your previous bankruptcy filing during your divorce, we'll also need a co-signer. Someone with substantial assets and proven financial stability. The hope died. I don't have anyone like that. My family isn't wealthy, and my business relationships are. According to our research, Thornton said, pulling out a document, you were previously married to Derek Whitmore. He maintained excellent credit throughout your marriage and was never party to your bankruptcy filing. Is he amenable to co-signing? Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. That was 7 years ago. We haven't spoken since the divorce. Nevertheless, legally, he remains your most viable option for a co-signer. His financial position would easily satisfy our requirements. Thornton slid a paper across the desk. This is a standard co-signer agreement. If you can obtain Mr. Whitmore's signature, we can approve your loan within 48 hours. The irony was suffocating. The man she'd called replaceable, the man she'd mocked as he walked out with his pathetic duffel bag, was now her only hope. Victoria took the paper with trembling hands. How do I contact him? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thornton consulted his notes. Our records show he's employed with Meridian Holdings. I'm sure their HR department can facilitate contact for financial matters. The next morning, Victoria sat in her car outside the Meridian Holdings building, paralyzed by humiliation. The structure was even more imposing than Heritage Capital, a monument to corporate power. Derek worked here. Doing what? The last she'd known, he'd been in middle management at some forgettable company. She'd called the main number, navigating through automated systems until reaching human resources. The woman who answered had been polite but firm. I can forward a message to Mr. Whitmore's office, but I cannot provide direct contact information or confirm employment details. It's urgent. It's about a financial matter. I'm his ex-wife. A pause. I'll mark it priority. Someone will return your call within 2 business days. 2 days. Victoria had walked through her empty house that night, seeing it clearly for the first time in years. The kitchen where she'd stood while mocking Derek. The bedroom where she and Brandon had celebrated their affair. All of it was crumbling now. The marble countertops concealed water damage. The hardwood floors needed refinishing she couldn't afford. The whole place was a monument to choices that had seemed so right and now felt so catastrophically wrong. Her phone rang, snapping her back to the present. Unknown number. Hello. Ms. Castellane? This is Patricia Moreno, Executive Assistant to Derek Whitmore. I understand you wish to schedule a meeting. Victoria's heart pounded. Executive Assistant? Yes. Yes, I need to speak with Derek about a financial matter. It's urgent. Mr. Whitmore has availability Friday at 10 a.m. at the Meridian Holdings headquarters. I'll email you security clearance information and parking instructions. The call ended before Victoria could respond. She sat in her car, staring at the building, and felt the weight of 7 years pressing down on her. She'd thrown him out like garbage. She'd built a life with another man on the ashes of their marriage. And now she needed him, needed his signature, his approval, his charity. Friday couldn't come soon enough. And Victoria dreaded it more than anything she'd ever faced. Victoria arrived 30 minutes early on Friday, though she waited in her car until exactly 9:55 a.m. The Meridian Holdings building loomed above her, all sharp angles and reflective glass, a fortress of commerce that made her feel small and desperate. She'd changed outfits 4 times that morning, finally settling on a conservative navy suit that she hoped projected professionalism rather than desperation. Security was thorough. Her driver's license was scanned, her photo taken, a visitor badge issued with restrictions clearly printed, escorted access only, executive floor. A uniformed guard accompanied her to the elevator, swiped a keycard, and pressed the button for the 42nd floor. Someone will meet you when the doors open, he said, stepping back as the elevator climbed. Victoria watched the numbers ascend, each floor a reminder of how far she'd fallen and how high Derek had apparently risen. Executive floor. Executive assistant. The Derek she'd known had been competent but unremarkable, content with his steady paycheck and modest ambitions. What had happened to him? The elevator doors opened to a reception area that looked like something from an architecture magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic city views. Modern art adorned the walls. The furniture was sleek, expensive, and intimidating in its perfection. Ms. Castellane. A woman in her 50s approached, her bearing professional and assessing. I'm Patricia Moreno. If you'll follow me, please. They walked down a corridor lined with closed doors bearing titles like Chief Financial Officer and Senior Vice President of Operations. Patricia stopped at the corner office, the largest, Victoria noted with growing unease, and knocked twice before opening the door. Mr. Whitmore, your 10 o'clock is here. Thank you, Patricia. The voice was familiar but different, deeper, more assured, carrying an authority that made Victoria hesitate in the doorway. Then she saw him, and her breath caught. Derek stood by the window, backlit by morning sun, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly revenue. He'd changed. His shoulders seemed broader, his posture more commanding. His face had lost the softness she remembered, replaced by sharp angles and the kind of weathered confidence that came from years of winning. Victoria, he said, turning to face her fully. No smile. No warmth. Just acknowledgement. Please, sit. She moved to the chair across from his desk, acutely aware of how the power dynamic had shifted. This was his territory, his domain, and she was here as a supplicant. Thank you for seeing me, she began, hating how small her voice sounded. I know it's been a long time. 7 years, Derek said, settling into his chair. His desk was immaculate, a single laptop, a leather portfolio, and a crystal paperweight that probably cost what she used to spend on groceries. You kept the house. Yes. She hadn't expected him to ask about that. Though I'm struggling with the maintenance costs. Divorce and things didn't work out as planned. Brandon Castellane, Derek said, referencing her ex-husband's name without emotion. Regional VP position fell through in a restructuring. Started 3 businesses, event planning, real estate consulting, and a sports bar franchise. All failed within 18 months. Your divorce was finalized 2 years ago. You filed for bankruptcy during the proceedings. Victoria felt her face flush. You've been keeping tabs on me. No, Derek said simply. But when Heritage Capital requested a background check for loan co-signing, the information became relevant. You need my signature. It wasn't a question. Victoria pulled out the co-signer agreement, her hands shaking slightly as she slid it across the immaculate desk. Castellane and Associates is a solid business. I just need bridge financing to cover some cash flow gaps. Heritage approved the loan contingent on a qualified co-signer, and you're my only option. Derek didn't touch the paper. He looked at her with eyes that held no anger, no bitterness, just a cool professional distance that was somehow worse than either. Tell me about your business. For the next 20 minutes, Victoria pitched. She explained her client roster, her growth projections, her plans for expansion. Derek listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on his laptop. When she finished, he sat back and steepled his fingers. Your business model is flawed, he said. You're heavily dependent on 3 anchor clients who account for 70% of your revenue. 2 of those clients are restructuring and will likely reduce their marketing budgets by at least 30% in the next fiscal year. Your overhead is too high, you're leasing premium office space you don't need, and your staff compensation is misaligned with industry standards for a firm your size. Victoria opened her mouth to argue, but Derek continued. The loan you're requesting, $380,000, will buy you approximately 11 months before you face the same cash flow crisis again. Heritage Capital knows this. They've structured the interest rate and repayment terms to maximize their return when you inevitably default and they liquidate your assets. You don't know that, Victoria said, but her conviction was crumbling. I do, Derek replied. It's what I do. I analyze failing companies, identify systemic problems, and restructure them for profitability. I've done it 86 times in the past 3 years for Meridian Holdings. He paused. Which owns Heritage Capital? Among other subsidiaries. The room seemed to tilt. You own Heritage Capital. Meridian Holdings does. I'm the Chief Restructuring Officer. Derek opened his portfolio and withdrew a document. Which means I already own your debt, Victoria. Heritage forwarded your application to me 2 weeks ago for review. I've had my team analyzing Castellane and Associates since then. Victoria couldn't breathe. The man she'd thrown away, the man she'd called replaceable, now controlled whether her business lived or died. Why did you agree to meet with me? She whispered. Derek stood and walked back to the window, his silhouette sharp against the skylight. Because 7 years ago, you asked me a question. You asked if I had anything to say as I left our home. I didn't answer then. He turned to face her. I'm answering now. Victoria waited, her heart hammering, for the speech she deserved, the recriminations, the justified anger, the revenge. Instead, Derek walked to his desk, picked up a different document, and handed it to her. This is an acquisition offer for Castellane and Associates. Meridian will purchase your client contracts, your intellectual property, and your brand for $180,000. Enough to clear your immediate debts and provide you with modest capital. In return, you'll sign a 2-year consulting agreement at a competitive salary to help transition your clients to our marketing division. You're buying my company. Victoria stared at the paper. I'm offering you an exit strategy that preserves your dignity and provides you with stable income while you rebuild. The alternative is defaulting on the Heritage loan, bankruptcy, and liquidation where you'll get significantly less. Derek sat down. You have 72 hours to decide. Patricia will show you out. He returned to his laptop, the meeting clearly over. Victoria stood on shaking legs, still holding the acquisition offer. Derek, she said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry. For everything. I was cruel and dismissive, and you deserved so much better than what I gave you. Derek looked up, and for just a moment, Victoria thought she saw something human in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or the ghost of who they'd both been. I know, he said quietly. But I became better anyway. Not because of you. In spite of you. Patricia appeared in the doorway. Victoria followed her out, clutching the acquisition offer like a lifeline, understanding with crushing clarity that she'd lost far more 7 years ago than she'd ever realized. Victoria signed the acquisition papers on the 3rd day, sitting in her nearly empty office while the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the walls she'd soon leave behind. The decision hadn't been difficult. Derek's offer was the only lifeline in a sea of impossible choices. But signing her name felt like signing away more than a business. It felt like acknowledging a truth she'd spent 7 years avoiding. The transition was efficient and painless, orchestrated by Meridian's professional team. Victoria's clients were contacted, her employees offered positions within Meridian's marketing division, her lease negotiated to an early termination. Within 6 weeks, Castellane and Associates existed only as a line item in Meridian Holdings' vast portfolio of acquired properties. Victoria's consulting position was real. She worked from a modest office on the 28th floor of the Meridian building, far below Derek's executive suite, helping former clients adapt to new account managers. The work was honest, the salary fair, and the arrangement professional. She never saw Derek. Patricia handled all communications, sending concise emails with project updates and deliverables. 3 months into her consulting contract, Victoria worked late one evening, reviewing campaign materials for a client she'd served for 5 years. The office was quiet, most employees long gone. She heard footsteps and looked up to see Derek standing in her doorway, still dressed in his suit despite the late hour. "You're working on the Henderson account," he observed. "They asked for me specifically," Victoria said, caught off guard by his presence. "I know their brand voice, their history. I thought it would help with continuity." Derek nodded, stepping into her office. It was the first time they'd been alone since that meeting in his office. "Patricia said you've exceeded expectations. Multiple clients have specifically praised your transition work. I'm trying to do right by them." Victoria set down her pen. "They trusted me with their businesses. Just because I failed doesn't mean they should suffer." "Accountability," Derek said. "That's new." The words stung because they were true. Victoria had spent years blaming others, Derek for being too passive, Brandon for being too ambitious, the market for being too competitive. She'd never owned her role in her own failures. "I learned it too late," she admitted. "After everything fell apart with Brandon, after the bankruptcy, after losing the house finally, I had to face myself. The person I saw wasn't someone I liked very much." Derek leaned against the doorframe, studying her. "The house sold 6 months ago. I'm renting a modest apartment now. 1 bedroom, reasonable neighborhood." Victoria smiled sadly. "It's actually peaceful. No marble countertops to maintain. No pretense." "The granite countertops you made me buy," Derek said, and there was something in his voice, not quite humor, but not cruelty either. "That I made you save months to afford," Victoria corrected. "While I secretly resented you for not earning more, for not being more ambitious, for not being someone you never pretended to be." She took a breath. "I was so focused on what I thought success looked like that I couldn't see what actually mattered." Derek was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The night you threw me out, you called me replaceable. I remember." That word stayed with me, kept me awake in that motel room, kept pushing me through 18-hour days, kept me focused when everything else felt impossible. He met her eyes. "I wanted to prove you wrong. I wanted you to see what you'd thrown away." "You succeeded," Victoria said softly. "You became everything I claimed you couldn't be. Everything I said Brandon was and you weren't." "No," Derek said, pushing off the doorframe. "I became what I was always capable of being. You just never looked closely enough to see it." He moved to leave, then paused. "Your consulting contract ends in 18 months. What will you do after?" Victoria had thought about this constantly. Start smaller this time. Maybe freelance consulting, building slowly, living within my means. I'm done chasing the appearance of success. Derek nodded slowly. "Patricia will send you information about a potential opportunity. Meridian is launching a boutique consulting division focused on small to mid-size businesses. We need someone who understands entrepreneurship from ground level, including the mistakes." He looked at her directly. Someone who's failed and learned from it. The position would be permanent, with benefits and equity participation. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "Why would you offer me that? After everything?" "Because holding on to anger is exhausting," Derek said simply. Because people can change if they're willing to do the work. And because you're actually good at what you do when you're not trying to build an empire to prove something to yourself. I don't deserve your kindness. Probably not, Derek agreed. But I'm not offering it for you. I'm offering it because it's the right business decision, and because I've learned that success means building something sustainable, not just proving a point. He walked to the door, then turned back one last time. You were right about one thing, Victoria. I was replaceable, as your husband. But that just meant I was free to become something better. Somewhere better. After he left, Victoria sat in her quiet office and cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of wasted years and second chances. She'd thrown away a good man because he wasn't flashy enough, ambitious enough, exciting enough. She'd chosen Brandon's promises over Derek's steady presence and discovered too late that flash faded and promises broke. Derek had gotten his revenge, she realized. Not through cruelty or humiliation, but through transformation. He'd become undeniably successful, had literally bought the leverage she needed to survive, and then had chosen mercy over vindication. The power shift was complete, she'd needed him, and he'd helped anyway. But the real revenge, the deepest cut, was simpler. Derek had become genuinely happy. She could see it in his bearing, his confidence, his measured generosity. He'd moved past their marriage, past his anger, past the need to prove anything to anyone. He'd built a life that worked. While Victoria was only now, 7 years later, beginning to understand what actually mattered. She dried her tears, returned to the Henderson campaign materials, and worked until the building's night security made their rounds. When she finally left, stepping out into the cool evening air, she looked up at the Meridian building, at the executive floors high above where Derek had built his empire. She'd called him replaceable. He'd proven himself irreplaceable. And in doing so, he'd given her something she never expected, the chance to become someone better too. The real power shift, Victoria understood now, wasn't in Derek's corner office or his title or his wealth. It was in his ability to succeed without needing her to witness it, to be generous without needing her gratitude, and to move forward without needing her at all. That was the victory she could never take from him. And perhaps, if she worked hard enough, if she stayed humble enough, if she learned the lessons he'd been trying to teach through his silence, perhaps one day she could build something a fraction as meaningful as what he'd created from the ashes of their marriage. Not for redemption. Not for forgiveness. But because some people deserve to be learned from, even if you understood their lessons far too late. Derek had been one of those people. And Victoria had spent 7 years discovering just how much that cost.